Picture this. It's the 1930s and the world is plunged into the depths of the Great Economic Depression, a time when the global economy was in turmoil, when stock markets crashed, banks failed, businesses shuttered, and millions were left unemployed. The stage was set for this economic catastrophe in the late 1920s. The Roaring Twenties, as they were called, was a period of economic prosperity and escalating stock prices in Western economies, primarily in the United States. But this period of prosperity was built on shaky foundations. The stock market was overvalued, and when reality hit, it hit hard. The stock market crash of 1929 marked the beginning of the Great Depression. This was not just a financial crisis, but an economic one that would soon spread its tentacles across the globe. As economies were intertwined through trade, the effects of the crash in the United States were felt far and wide. Across the Atlantic, in Europe, economies that were still recovering from the aftermath of World War I were hit hard. Countries like Germany and Britain, who were heavily reliant on American loans and investments, found themselves in a financial crunch. And then there was India. An important British colony at the time, India was not insulated from the global economic downturn. The Indian economy, largely agrarian and dependent on the export of raw materials, was vulnerable to fluctuations in the global market. As demand for exports fell and prices plummeted, India's economy began to falter. The economic depression was not just a distant phenomenon happening in far-off lands. It was a global crisis, reaching every corner, every city, every village. It was a time of uncertainty, of hardship, of change. The world as we knew it was being reshaped, and no one was immune. As the economic shockwaves radiated across the globe, India too began to feel the tremors. The Great Depression left a significant impact on India's agrarian economy. As the ominous clouds of the Depression spread across the globe, they didn't spare the vast agricultural landscape of India either. The majority of India's population at that time was directly dependent on agriculture, making the rural economy particularly vulnerable to the global economic tremors. The Depression led to a dramatic fall in agricultural prices. Imagine the plight of the Indian farmer who, after months of toiling under the sun, was left with a harvest that fetched him a pittance. The value of crops plummeted, and the farmer's income followed suit. This steep fall in prices induced a severe agrarian distress, which was felt most acutely by the small and marginal farmers. Farmers who had taken loans for seeds, equipment, and other farming essentials found themselves trapped in a vicious cycle of debt. As income from the produce dwindled, repaying these loans became an uphill task, leading to an increase in indebtedness. The rural population was caught in a web of economic hardship with no immediate respite in sight. The situation was further complicated by the lack of institutional credit facilities in rural areas. The farmers were largely dependent on local moneylenders who charged exorbitant interest rates, adding to their woes. The rural economy was crippled, and the farmer, who was once the proud provider of food, was left struggling for survival. While the urban areas also felt the pinch of the Depression, it was the rural areas that bore the brunt. The rural economy was shattered, and the prosperity of the villages, which were the lifeblood of India, was severely compromised. The agrarian distress was not just an economic catastrophe, it was a human tragedy. It resulted in widespread poverty, malnutrition, and even starvation in some areas. The rural society was destabilized, and the traditional agrarian way of life was forever altered. The Indian farmer, the backbone of the Indian economy, was left broken and destitute. The Depression didn't just stop at the fields, it seeped into the cities, causing widespread unemployment. This was a time of profound uncertainty as factories and workshops sat idle, and the hum of industry fell silent. The economic depression had a domino effect on India's industrial sector, leading to a slump in production that reverberated through the economy. As demand for goods plummeted, factories and workshops were forced to cut back on production. But this was not a simple matter of turning down the volume of activity. Each factory that closed its doors, each workshop that shut down, meant job losses, and these job losses added up quickly. In a short span, thousands of workers found themselves without a means to earn a living. The ripple effects of these job losses were felt far and wide. India's cities, once bustling with activity, were now eerily quiet. The streets, typically filled with vendors peddling their wares and workers hurrying to their jobs, were now populated by jobless individuals. The urban population, which had once enjoyed a measure of financial security, was now grappling with the harsh realities of unemployment. This widespread joblessness did not just affect the individuals who lost their jobs. It had far-reaching social implications. Families were pushed into poverty, unable to afford even the basic necessities of life. The social fabric of the cities began to unravel as desperation set in. Unemployment led to an increase in crime rates as people resorted to desperate measures to survive. The depression was not just an economic crisis, it was a social crisis as well. It shook the very foundations of society and left deep scars on the urban landscape. The cities, once symbols of prosperity and opportunity, had become symbols of despair and hopelessness. The once bustling cities were now filled with desolate and jobless individuals. The Great Economic Depression had turned the tide of progress and prosperity, leaving in its wake a trail of hardship and struggle. The echoes of this crisis can still be heard today, a stark reminder of the devastating impact of economic downturns on human lives. The British colonial government's response to the Depression was far from sufficient. This statement is not an exaggeration, but a reflection of the harsh reality. The British administration, while recognizing the crisis, was ill-equipped and unwilling to tackle it effectively. It failed to implement vigorous measures to alleviate the widespread distress. To comprehend the government's response, let's delve into the actions taken. The British government attempted to address the agrarian distress by introducing the Land Revenue Reduction Act. This act aimed to reduce land revenue demands on farmers. However, the reduction was meager, and the farmers, already burdened with crippling debts, found little relief. The government's response to the unemployment crisis was equally inadequate. The efforts were largely confined to minor labor reforms and the extension of public works, which were insufficient to absorb the vast numbers of unemployed. The government's inadequate response meant that the brunt of the depression was borne by the common people. The social impact of the depression was devastating. As economic hardships intensified, poverty in India reached new heights. The already impoverished masses were pushed further into the abyss of destitution. The depression also gave rise to social unrest. As the agrarian distress and unemployment crisis worsened, protests and movements against the British rule gained momentum. The economic hardships fueled the flames of the Indian independence movement, leading to a surge in nationalist sentiments. The Great Depression was not just an economic crisis, it was a social catastrophe that shook the very foundations of Indian society. This catastrophe laid bare the fundamental flaws in the colonial economic system and the British government's apathy towards the welfare of the Indian people. It served as a stark reminder of the need for self-governance and economic autonomy. In the end, the Depression was not merely a period of economic decline, but a turning point in India's struggle for independence. It acted as a catalyst, accelerating the journey towards a self-reliant and independent India. The Great Depression was not just an economic crisis, it was a social catastrophe that shook the very foundations of Indian society. The Great Depression left behind a scarred and battered Indian economy. It was a period of turmoil, of struggle and hardship. However, as the dust settled, the aftermath of this economic catastrophe revealed a new perspective, a new understanding of the economic landscape of the country. In the wake of the Great Depression, India found itself grappling with the remnants of an economy that was in disarray. Agrarian distress and unemployment had reached alarming levels. The Indian economy, once thriving, was now struggling to stand on its feet. The agricultural sector, the backbone of the Indian economy, had been severely impacted. Unemployment was rampant, and the social fabric of the country was strained to its limits. However, every cloud has a silver lining. The Great Depression, while devastating, served as a catalyst for change. It forced India to reevaluate its economic policies and strategies. The lessons learned from this crisis were invaluable, reshaping the economic landscape of the country. India realized the importance of self-sufficiency and began to focus on strengthening its domestic industries. Policies were implemented to promote local manufacturing and reduce dependence on foreign goods. The government realized the need for a more balanced economy and made efforts to diversify, promoting sectors other than agriculture. The crisis also brought to light the importance of social security and welfare schemes. The government took steps to mitigate the impact of such crises in the future, introducing unemployment benefits and other social safety nets. The need for better labor laws and workers' rights was also recognized, leading to significant reforms in these areas. Furthermore, the crisis underscored the importance of effective economic planning and management. It highlighted the need for a robust financial system capable of withstanding economic shocks. This led to the establishment of financial institutions and regulatory bodies, strengthening the economic infrastructure of the country. The Great Depression was a dark chapter in India's economic history, a period of struggle and hardship, but it was also a time of learning and resilience. It was a time when India, despite the odds, managed to turn adversity into opportunity, laying the foundation for a stronger, more resilient economy.